see. We may have a couple more people. Well, actually, I'm expecting a couple more people to join us, but we won't wait. Let's run around and do introductions. And let's start with Michelle. Go ahead. Now that your camera's on.
Hi, Michelle Edwards with the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission.
All right, sticking with the PDCs. Lisa.
Good morning from the Northern Neck. Lisa Hall with the Northern Neck Planning District Commission.
All right, Brianna, I guess that makes you next.
Hi, Brianna Heath with the George Washington Regional Commission.
Okay, thank you, Brianna. Brian.
Good morning, Brian Johnson with Virginia Farm Bureau.
Sarah.
Sarah Parmalee with the Piedmont Environmental Council covering Rappahannock and Culpeper.
All right, and our lone out of the basin person, Larry, even though I'm expecting another.
Larry Zaragoza. I live in Northern Virginia.
And we don't hold that against you. Um, and let's see, Don.
Don McCowan with Piedmont Environmental Council for Orange and Madison counties.
Okay. And John McCarthy's there somewhere, but he's off camera. So, and of course, that leaves Jillian and me. What I wanted to do today, I hope folks had a chance to watch the presentations to the River Basin Commission last week. First by Brandon Bull to kind of capsulize the key legislation that passed. And even though the most significant has delayed effective date, we've still got, well, there's a lot of work to do before the effective date of that legislation. And then the different perspectives of uh, advocacy groups that worked hard on that legislation. Um, First, the Bay Foundation, who probably was the lead advocate on promoting the legislation, and then you have the representative of the wastewater operators, the Farm Bureau, and the biosolids industry to kind of give you an array of points of view. Let's put it that way. Everybody did end up working together um, to try to craft legislation that there was by and large consensus on. So that kind of sets us on a path for Virginia policy. And what I wanted to do on behalf of the commission members, our elected officials, is kind of throw out there to this group and whomever what's on the horizon in terms of decision making, both for the Commonwealth and for localities. And I just wanted to free think this. I've gotten some input from some of the folks who presented last week, but and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But really, what I wanted to do is throw it to those in the River Basin's kind of email list. All right, what are y'all's thoughts? And I don't know if anybody has a burning desire to go first. Um, um, being This has not been a group that I had to call on people to talk. So anybody have
I
a
can go.
go ahead,
Um,
Gianna, please.
I guess just like a very surface level point to consider is that if there's any mandatory requirements of the localities that would cost them extra funds to implement, that's something that would definitely impact um, budgets that are already pretty strained.
Okay, thank you. And I think Chris Pomeroy kind of spoke to that. It's really going to fall um, to the testing initially on the wastewater treatment plants. And so that, it becomes something that it gets built into rate structures. But okay, good. Good point. Okay, who wants to go next? Larry, go ahead.
You always know that I'm always willing to contribute, Eldon. So I think there's a couple things. The first thing is because of the MCL rulemaking, um, the two PFAS compounds we have an MCL for are are deemed a hazardous waste. So what that means is that EPA is going to need to develop uh, treatment, storage, and disposal requirements for these compounds. That is not happening right now, but it will. And so there will be requirements for incineration. And you probably know that there's EPA has done some testing and they've been able to get 6 nines of destruction for some of their testing, uh, which is consistent with what they've done with dioxin and some other compounds, which is pretty incredible. And in addition to that, there's going to be requirements for landfilling. Because it's a hazardous waste, it will have to be dried before landfilling. And so the industry folks, wastewater treatment operators, and others uh, are largely familiar with these requirements as they happened with other compounds. Um, and so they're anticipating it. And my understanding is, at least from a Northern Virginia perspective, is people are thinking about the need to work together in um, as a region and develop the capabilities to manage this stuff. The only thing that I know that's happening right now is coordination to figure out how to manage things. Um, but part of it is, and then I know some facilities are also purchasing um, the capability to dry things. Um, so that's one thing that's on the horizon. And that also makes it hard for people to make investments right now in the technology needed to manage this stuff because you don't want to make a huge investment, which could be hundreds of millions of dollars, only to find out that it needs to be changed when new rules come out. Um, the other thing I would note is that in the conversations that took place in the video which you shared, one of the things that did not come out is the the persistence. Now, one of the lawyers ended up talking about the stability of PFAS, but they didn't talk about timeframes. And PFAS is much more persistent than anything else that we deal with the environment. I think, with the exception of acid mine drainage, uh, which of course lasts for hundreds to thousands of years. Uh, PFAS is not that persistent, but it's really persistent. So so even applying a little bit for a long period of time is likely to end up with um, leaving land unsuitable for future agricultural purposes. And so if you're concerned about that, it seems like you're going to want to be putting this stuff into a landfill or incinerating it, uh, because those alternatives give you a lower risk. And if you do incinerate it, you're going to have to choose a facility that has good destruction capabilities. And the facility that's in Lorton, Virginia, they have 95% destruction capabilities, but the some of the other, I don't know that the others are at that level. 95 will not be acceptable in the future.
Um, Remind me, Larry, and I know we've got it in our past notes because we talked about this last year. 1400 degrees centigrade? Is that what we have to reach?
I think that's correct. That seems right, which is really high.
Pardon me for laughing. I'm struck with, hey, you have a knack for understatement. Yeah, yeah, that, because I've seen where I want to say Lorton, I seem to remember in correspondence you and I did back and forth months ago, 1400 degrees Fahrenheit, which gets you to the 95%, but not I may be remembering that wrong. I'm doing that without going back to my notes. I apologize.
It's something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Um, good points, all. Some, I'll just make this observation. Some of what you talk about, we may know before the delayed implementation date of a year from now. Most of which, like what kind of technology, um, we may not know. And yet there are going to be implementation decisions being made, or at least starting down a path of making those decisions. And not long after you start making those decisions, you have to start making appropriation decisions. Um, okay, who would like to take the next shot?
I'll offer up something, and I don't pretend to have anywhere near the expertise that Larry does on this topic. This is not my forte. But one of the things that I've heard being a potential issue in my region is the landfill capacity. If these things are going to have to be, even dried and then deposited, whatever the case, landfill capacity is already an issue. And this could exacerbate that for sure.
And I think that's a national problem.
Yes, I would say.
But
But yes.
Larry, is your hand back up or is that from before?
No, it's a fresh one. So I just thought I would chime in on the landfill capacity. So one of the things that I did for the Potomac Riverkeeper was an analysis of landfill capacity. Landfill capacity is an issue uh, if you do not dry the biosolids first. Um, the the landfills are going to be concerned about leaching, and so the practice right now is they're taking these wet biosolids the way that um, they would if they were applying it onto crops, and they are putting some of it onto landfills. And when they do that, they can do something no more than generally 5% of the solids that are deposited. If they put on more than that, they end up creating a problem because the landfill becomes unstable. If they dry the biosolids first, then it's not going to be the same. You're not going to have an issue. Um, and so I just thought I would clarify that. But there will be, um, so you won't have a short-term crisis, but you are going to have to build more landfill capacity if you end up uh, putting them in landfills. But I think that if the alternative is put it on a crop where it can impact the crops and end up impacting nearby drinking water wells and impact fisheries versus putting it in a landfill. Putting it in a landfill is probably the much better alternative because you don't incur the liability for impacts on health and the environment.
Absolutely. I would wholeheartedly agree with that.
Um, eh, all right, John's got his hand up. I'm gonna go to John and then at some point I want to come back to the drying. John.
Hey, Ellen, and thanks everybody. Sorry for being late. I'm chiming in from Ace, actually. Can you all hear me? All right, I'm getting some nods. Okay, so apologize. I can give I do have some comments on landfill incineration, and then I do have some general comments from the meeting as well. I don't know if this is my shot for everything. So
Take it in whichever order you want. We'll get to it all.
okay, so backing up a little bit, so comments on incineration. So the one thing that you did bring up was that 1400 degrees centigrade temperature. And that is the temperature that it takes to break that carbon fluorine bond. One thing I would like us to be cautious about when it comes to incineration is a lot of traditional incinerators do not operate at that temperature, but they're still showing really good removals because what they're doing is it's extremely drying out that product, and a lot of that PFAS is actually then being evaporated. We don't have a lot of research done on the full mass balance in these incinerators that we know are not operating at that 1400 degrees centigrade temperature, but are still showing PFAS removals. So I do just want to caution us that we don't get into a cycle where we are pushing for compliance and we're just not actually following through on where that PFAS is going, and we're not actually using an applicable destruction technology. So that's just one comment on incineration. On landfilling, what we really need to be cautious about is, yes, the capacity is a major issue, but it's the leachate that's the bigger concern for me. Is that leachate is then either coming back to the wastewater plant or is going into the groundwater. Most often it's going to a wastewater plant. So again, because we're using these, like we're talking about PFAS, which is a forever chemical, putting it into the landfill doesn't get rid of it either, and it doesn't destroy it. It really just kicks the can down the road further. And when you look at the numbers coming out of the landfills, the leachate is some of the most highest concentrated waste we see, even compared to industrials. So I really caution us to, I don't feel that landfilling is a good solution to um, not land applying these biosolids. I think one of the things we did hear at the meeting from the ag group was that while there are some who are cautious, and I respect that, there are a lot of farmers who still want this product. It is a great product. It does great things for the fields and the crops. We probably don't need to be growing, anything that people are going to be eating out of the crop necessarily until we fully understand what the crop uptake of the PFAS is, but more from a holistic environmental standpoint, we cannot continue to take these nutrients from the wastewater plant and simply destroy them or trash them into a landfill. We need these carbons and nutrients going back into the soil to have a sustainable agricultural future. I really do fully believe that. Um, Now, sort of to back up a little bit and talk about the legislation as a whole, and I believe I said this on this committee prior to this legislation getting passed, is that when we look at wastewater flows or we look at biosolids, we are regulating PFAS in the middle of the problem. And it really, it kind of breaks my brain um, I'm John Brindle, by the way, for anyone that doesn't know me. I'm the environmental programs manager for Stafford County Utilities. But I really don't understand why the legislation that passed, both the industrial legislation as well as the biosolids, we're looking at this problem from the middle, and we are creating a now we have a set of regulations that are outside the standard water quality regulations, that are outside the standard biosolids regulations. You know, we have already had processes in place to regulate these compounds, and we have now created these avenues that are outside the standard flow. And while I understand that there was a belief and a need that we needed to take action. At the very minimal, we're creating alternate workflows for all of the state regulators and all of the municipal workers who have to deal with these problems. But from a larger perspective, until we do something about the actual use and manufacture of these compounds, we're putting the burden on these utilities, who in turn I have to then raise my rates on my ratepayers to pay for upgrades or to pay for remediation or to pay for additional landfilling. So the people that we're trying to protect are ending up being the ones paying for it, and the amount of money I'm getting back from the class action suits that we are a part of against the PFAS manufacturers are pennies on the dollar compared to what it's going to take for me to install PFAS removal at my drinking water plant. And we haven't even gotten into even conceptually what it would take to remove PFAS at the wastewater plant. And again, I don't feel that then that cost should be put on the utility and then that burden be pushed on to the standard ratepayers. So with that, just generally speaking, when it comes to PFAS, and I think the legislation that was passed does have the right point of view, and that we are looking at source identification, and
Right.
we are trying to still find a path to preserve biosolids land application. And then the one other piece from the meeting that was one of the public comments on the DEQ NIPT or VPDS discharge permit enforcement. That there was the case study that the one gentleman commented on, and then I believe the chair kind of indicated that we were going to continue taking up this topic. I just wanted to.
You're talking about the comments on the Mountain um, um,
Mountain
View
View.
nursing home.
So, yeah, so I wasn't able to look at what specifically that permit entailed. I just wanted to make the comment that that has not ever been my experience with the DEQ enforcement division. That I have always found them to be meticulous in what they do, and if my reports are 0.1 off at the end of the year, they will let me know about it. So just the case study and that story that was given, I just wanted to give an alternate point of view that that has not ever been my experience with DEQ at any of my permanent facilities. So with that, I think I'm finally done, and yeah, I'll let somebody else go. I appreciate it. Thank you guys. Yeah, sorry for jumping on late.
No. Thank you, John. All good points. You take me back to October of last year when we had the presentation from the Southern Environmental Law Center about their project in, I want to say, North Carolina, that looked at source and dealing with the issue at the source and how effective that was as comparison to other approaches. But okay, who wants to go next? Brian, you want to offer something from the Farm Bureau perspective?
Yes, as was mentioned earlier, obviously the biosolids are certainly an essential resource for our farmers. One thing that was kind of came up at the meeting, I guess last week was, and I think relates to your question in this conversation, just talking about the development of the testing protocol. What information is going to come from that, and how is that going to be applied? So that would be some things I would throw out in response to your question.
Okay, I'm going to add another Farm Bureau perspective that was shared with me by Martha at the end of the meeting, which was that before we get too far into what's next, we need to make sure we've got what we need in order to do what we're required to do now. In other words, what has to happen over the next year for implementation was her I'll say caution. John McCarthy, you've got your hand up.
Sure. Thanks, Eldon. And it's with some trepidation I raised my hand on this, but I have a long history dealing with land application of biosolids in my prior role as a county administrator, and the I remember going with most of my board of supervisors on a site visit to Blue Plains, which was going to be the point of origin of most of the biosolids that were going to be applied in our county. And at the time, it was a particularly not well-run facility that had a lot of violations and a tour.
Hey, John, give us an idea of time frame. When was
This
that?
was the 90s.
Okay.
So it's a long time ago. So I full disclosure, it's a historical reference. But the reason I mention it is not because of the state of the facility at the time relative to what it is now, which is, I gather, a much better run and fully compliant facility. But as part of the tour, they showed where the location was going to be for the incinerator that they had fully planned to build to take care of the disposal of the dewatered sludge. And of course, it was literally across the river from Alexandria, and they were utterly, convinced that there would never be any way they would get that through the permitting process. And so it was a decision made. And the reason I mention it at all is because any final disposal mechanism has got its warts, and if they're not done well, there's going to be problems. An incinerator is going to have incinerator ash that's typically a hazardous waste material that's going to have to be disposed of in a hazardous waste certified landfill. There's going to be particulate matter that comes out of the smokestack. If you put it in a landfill, whether it's the hazardous material or whether it's just simply dewatered sludge, some of which could address Mr. Brindle's concerns about, both the leachate being contaminated by the sludge. The more it's dewatered and the more it's put into a cell that's capped and closed in a reasonable amount of time, you have an end game on that material. But every one of these ultimate disposal methods, and if I can offend potentially at least my friends at Farm Bureau by saying that spreading on an agricultural field is one form of disposal as well, that's got problematic concerns as have been expressed by other people, particularly if the quality of the biosolids don't meet certain standards and if they have PFAS, present in them. None of these solutions are panaceas. They all require a level of governmental intervention in an industry that has no willingness to be regulated in terms of what it produces. It just wants someone else to socialize the costs of dealing with the consequences. So we have PFAS that continue to be out there in the world. Nobody wants to limit, certain kinds of uses, and we are perplexed with whether it's going to be the middle provider, as John describes, the sewage treatment plant operator, or whether it's going to be the ultimate provider, whether it's the landfill disposal or incinerator disposal. The rising tide of public awareness and concern over this is manifest. That's what, and if the legislation adopted in the last session wasn't perfect, it nevertheless was expressive of the fact that the problem is not going to go away by saying somebody else should take care of it. Somebody else isn't. And ultimately, one of the things government exists to do is to take care of problems that nobody else has a business model to solve. So that strays into the realm of philosophy more than an observation, but it does tie to the fact that this is something that's hardly gone away. My public career and now my nonprofit career straddles the fact that I was talking about sludge when I was 26. I'm still talking about it when I'm 64.
Yeah, I got you beat on both ends of that.
Yeah, I know you do.
Um, uh, Brianna, go ahead.
Can someone just offer a reminder as to why the onus isn't on the producers of the PFAS when this is such a big issue and we're worried about the cost to everyone else down the line?
I'd love my response not to be fatuous, but it starts and ends with they got bigger lobbyists than we do.
That's what I assumed.
Um, yeah, we'll just accept that one as an answer for now. Yeah, great question, Brianna. And I think anything we come up with that moves on to the commission, you know, is going to point out that we really need to deal with the source. I think we've heard it here. We've heard it previously in presentations. So that's the least expensive, least intrusive. But even that, there, is going to be a challenge. Lisa, we haven't heard from Northern Neck PDC.
Well, I echo a lot of the same comments that are made. One of the things that kind of I was thinking of when we were talking about landfill capacity is we're dealing too with transporting septage to landfills from septic pump outs and things like that because there's no facility here that accepts it in the Northern Neck. And so I'm just thinking of the double burden. I don't know.
So,
I'd be interested in the drying
I
facility.
hadn't. Hey, Lisa, let me interrupt you for just a second. I
Yeah.
apologize. Y'all are putting, seeing put into landfills.
Well, I don't know whether they're, I mean, wastewater treatment plants or I'm not sure where it's actually going, but it's going out of the
Okay.
area. So it might be going to municipal.
Because we had heard earlier that, the high cost of actually transporting it out of the,
Yes, that's
yeah.
still the case. There's still nothing here that can do it. So I'm interested in the dewatering piece of the PFAS part. You were going to talk about more about that. And like, are there going to be separate facilities for that? Is there testing at that stage? What does the dewatering phase look like?
Well, that actually brings me to a question that I've got hanging out there. What, there's a number of technologies, the oldest being the good old drying bed. Um, and you, and Larry, maybe this is a question for you or anybody else who wants to answer it before I move on and pick on other people who haven't weighed in. Um, what is the state of the technology relative to drying that sludge to the point where it is relatively more safe to landfill? I'm not going to just say safe to landfill.
Alan, the only thing I would say about that, first of all, I'm not expert in that area, but for the incineration, you can dewater, and dewatering basically is squeezing out or
Hmm.
possibly using centrifuges to reduce the water. Um, if you want to put it into a landfill, it needs to meet a much higher standard. Um, Alexandria is talking about building such a facility, and the cost of that is just astronomical. Uh, it just blows my mind.
Okay. More to come on that topic. Sarah, do you want to add something from your perspective?
Yeah, just one thing that I've kind of been noodling on, just because my home base is Culpeper, and I know that Culpeper's water sewer treatment plant, currently has been testing negative for PFAS, in their biosolids that get mixed in with everybody else's. But Culpeper is also about to see a massive explosion of data center growth, which could potentially, most of which will be engaged in some way in their water sewer treatment plant, whether they're using recycled water and then flushing um, whatever is left back into the water sewer treatment plant or using closed loop cooling, but there has been some concern about PFAS contamination in whatever the data centers are putting in their pipes, essentially, whatever biocides or whatever. And so I just wonder if we could see this in other rural localities that currently don't have issues with PFAS because they don't have a source, suddenly getting or testing positive for PFAS if they are, now experiencing data center growth. But I think we're probably a few years from actually seeing that happen.
Okay. All right. We'll note that. Brent, Friends of the Rappahannock.
Yeah, sorry I was late. I missed the original impetus for this conversation and exactly what's going on. So I feel a little bit behind the eight ball as to exactly what it is you want me to comment on.
Well,
Sorry.
let me just help out just a tad with that. This was really intended to be a wide open opportunity to talk about what's next on the horizon for policy questions
Mm,
that local and state elected officials are going to need to grapple with. Just so we can kind of put that out there for commission members. Yeah, well, you don't have to deal with necessarily with these questions this year, but they're coming. So it was the open opportunity. You can think, a short-term
Yeah,
horizon, you can think of midterm, or you can think a long horizon.
I
And we
guess my
kind of hit them all.
yeah, my thought process goes that we just passed legislation, and so we still have to figure out how this testing and disclosure is gonna happen. And then we have this work group, although my understanding is they're not going to stand up a new work group. They're going to probably do this work that's required by the legislation within the PAC, which is the PFAS Expert Advisory Group, I think is what it's called. They're going to add some members to that from the NGOs and other sectors, and they're going to go through that process there. So I hate to say this, but like I'm kind of like in wait and see mode to see what comes out of that work group as far as like what the next steps are and what's going to be needed with that, all that incremental. But I think that's what our legislature is going to probably want to follow as well.
Okay.
I will say, like, I'm undertaking. We have an event scheduled for the Northern Neck, but I'm working with the Potomac River Keeper Network, along with our Soil and Water Conservation District members, on a series of outreach meetings about PFAS. Hopefully, it goes a little bit better than the one in Warrenton did. But that's kind of my next focus, is trying to get the word out, because the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, speaking with Kendall Tyree, they're members of the Soil and Water Districts, have very much asked for um, training on PFAS and biosolids and getting up to speed. And so they've asked for basically a webinar type style training resource, of which we are trying to put together with them, and obviously would want to make sure that um, we do with soil and water, but I'm not looking to make our friends at the Farm Bureau mad either about this, about how we do this. So I would just want to make sure we're talking with you all, Brian, about um, how we go about creating this. I mean, it's a resource, like laying out the issues, not taking a side per se with this, but yeah, just want to make sure that that would be done in a process, giving everyone's kind of sides with that, or input on it. So I'll leave
Well,
that there.
so as you develop that outreach, whatever form or forms that takes, if you would keep us apprised, we're going to want to hear more about that.
Yeah, the goal is it would be like a digital thing that they could give to the Soil and Water Conservation District elected members, and I guess appointed, and that they would be able to use as a training sort of resource.
Okay. Um, Sarah, you've got your hand back up.
Yes, I guess a point of clarification, Eldon, are you looking for just any future policy demand or concerns, or just PFAS? Because
No, we were focused on PFAS because
okay.
we had that presentation on the new legislation. There's a tendency relative to the legislature say, "Oh, we dealt with that issue. We don't need to deal with that anymore." And that can pervade for 1, 2, 3, or 4, or even more years. I think in the case of transportation, that's gone as long as 20 years sometimes. Um, what I want to do is, I think we talked about around this group last fall that this is such an emerging issue. There's more we don't know than we know. And so it's going to be an iterative process. And what I wanted to do was pick everybody's brains and see if there's some things we can hand off to the commission. Just say, hey, just be aware that there are other things out there that are going to have to be dealt with. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but certainly coming down the road. And some of these things are short term that we've been talking about. Um, Don, I hadn't called on you yet, and you now got your hand up. So
Yeah, thanks. Brent or Larry may have a more intelligent way to talk about this, but one thing that's come to mind is House Bill 1072, the Lawfors bill that passed that kind of clarified localities, ability to sort of implement, I guess, a testing protocol or scheme. I don't remember. I did the research last year, but not every Virginia county has any ordinance in place, and I've just wondered if there would be any value in some kind of effort to either encourage localities to go ahead and get an ordinance in place or develop a model ordinance to, promote that idea. I think the whole point of that legislation was, again, to clarify what's already authorized and is allowed, but localities weren't really availing themselves of that. And so that legislation just sort of clarified that fact. Um, but just wondering if localities are going to take advantage of that and if the River Basin Commission might have a role in educating the localities about what they now can do and maybe offer a model to follow. So that's one thought.
great questions. Brandon Bull talked briefly about that legislation last week, and it does authorize localities by ordinance to test and monitor. Um, Makes it clear they're not eligible for any reimbursement from DEQ's sludge management fund, as Brandon told us last week. Um, uh, I think anything that's going to be done there is going to have to be done in close coordination with DEQ. Um, and your suggestion is there are going to be some localities who are going to be interested in deciding whether they want to do that or not. I think there's a gut reaction. Oh yeah, let's do that, and then you start looking into it, and it may be more intensive in terms of requirements than some of your localities in your part of the state are going to want to take on. But we'll put that on the list of things to consider. And do we want to dig a little farther into that? Okay, no, okay. Any Larry has put a comment in the on PFAS and cooling. You want to talk about that a little bit, Larry?
Oh, the reason I put it in is because that question was raised. So PFAS apparently is being used for at least some of the data centers in order to help with the cooling. I believe they mix it with either water or other materials, and that's used to help keep the chips cool. And biosolids were also mentioned. So biosolids are routinely used in the cooling towers when you use water cooling towers, and they're essential because if you don't put them in, then the cooling towers reportedly have um, been a form of Legionnaire's disease. So uh, so that both of these things, particularly the biosolids with cooling towers, they're going to end up in your wastewater. And your wastewater treatment facilities are probably not designed generally to deal with things like biocides. Um, so I was just putting that in because the question was raised during one of the comments.
Okay, that's one I hadn't heard. I understand the logic relative to Legionnaires. In other words, so that you don't have the contaminants that um, uh, such as Legionnaire's disease adhere to the cooling towers. It's so that they slough off for lack of a better way of describing it?
Well, what they will do is the cooling towers provide a moist environment that will support things like Legionnaire's disease. So you want to kill them so that it doesn't grow. The other thing that will happen is I guess there's other biological material that will tend to grow on these cooling tower surfaces. And so the biocides are there to help keep them clean of that material or reduce the buildup at least. And then all of this stuff is proprietary because data centers tend not to disclose what their processes are.
Okay. Yeah, this quickly becomes ever more complicated, and every solution has its associated additional degree of complexity and more problems. So, careful what you ask for. All right, I'm gonna stop my commentary. Other comments on future decision making, whether it be, things that we need to consider in the next year, such as, how somebody would implement 1072 as Don brought up, or longer term. Okay, here's what we are going to do. Jillian and I are going to take this free thinking and try to organize it a little bit. And I think I want to organize it in terms of short, medium, and long term issues, and it be, a very, very preliminary uh, uh, type of summary of future decision making, and we'll get it back out to the group. We've got a couple things on our plate in terms of technical committee now that we've really kind of made it into the year. We need to revisit the Rappahannock tribe issue, which, I fell behind on when I was out of commission, and have spent some time working on that this week. And so we're going to be in our July, August meetings, we're going to do more on this topic. What I'd like to do is take what we've done here, start to organize a very preliminary outline. I'll call it nothing more of an outline of something to be shared with the commission of here are things to be thinking about, ladies and gentlemen, that future decision making. And here's some of the complexities. Much more information is needed. But then also to pull together the factual information relative to the Rappahannock tribe, their request, their status as federally recognized, been specifically asked to do a little comparison of state recognized versus federal, and I've been trying to do a little bit of that. We have and you heard about it if you were if you were listening to that agenda item on the River Basin Commission, the state's tribal ombudsman, who is the person in the governor's office and the secretary of the Commonwealth's office, who is the liaison with the tribes, has left that position, and I don't know what the status is of filling that position. I was going to count on that person helping me with that comparison of state versus federal, It's not as complicated as I may be making it sound. But there is an interesting history that I've been learning. And okay, I'm going to try to say this without getting myself in trouble. Um, the history, if you go back into the last century, was not terribly different than the history um, this is totally my words, relative to Jim Crow. Um, and that really complicated the whole recognition process. And I think, I've got to somehow put that in context. That'll be a little challenging to weed my way through that. But it really does put things in context relative to how members of the tribes feel today. And so we've got to be honest to that without, you know, sticking a stick in anybody's eye. Um, and so I wasn't surprised to find that in my research earlier this week, but I hadn't totally expected it. And shame on me, I should have. Um, but anyhow, it's not a topic area that I have spent much time on before this year. Um, so as we do the next two technical committee meetings, those are our two agenda items. And I'm going to put things forward for people to react to and make comments on. And Lisa's going to help me out right now because she's put her hand up.
I'll help you out any way I can, Alden, on this topic. I mean, it's very close to a lot of the work that we do is the part of the Northern National Heritage Area. The tribe is very much part of it. And I know Brent works very closely with the tribe as well. There's something very interesting in at the Sovereignty Conference last year, just to quickly update, maybe to take a minute on this, is
Please.
the tribe is looking into the legal rights of nature. And if y'all have ever heard this, just stop me and say, yeah, we know about this. Sarah's nodding, yeah. But the idea that does
Legal rights of nature.
nature, yes, like
Okay.
does the river, for example, have legal standing as a person? And if it is harmed, who is authorized to bring damage in a court of law? Maybe getting back to what Brianna started with in terms of PFAS and who is responsible. And it's a fascinating, because right now, there are corporate persons, there are individuals, who has standing in a court of law. Does the Rappahannock River, for example, have standing in a court of law? And how, okay, somebody else, I don't know if somebody else is
I just dropped
on this.
in the book, Is a River Alive by
Right.
Robert McFarland. Really interesting book.
Okay, that's where I'm going with this. Brent has his hand up and probably knows more, but I think in terms of what this group is about and what the tribe is about, like with the refuge and the co-stewardship operation they've got going there, there's a lot of synergy between tribal efforts to restore the river and this body's efforts to eliminate legislation that could potentially harm the river. So I'm just seeing really great synergy and good things with respect to the Rappahannock tribe. So
Thank you. Appreciate it. Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, I was just going to expand. So it was very enlightening. I had a lot of questions about what the rights of nature thing really did, and that conference that you spoke of was enlightening. The concept has legs in other countries, such as Ecuador. There's been a few court decisions that have been made for the rights of rivers and other things. That is a concept that is obviously fairly foreign in, I'll call it, U.S. governments. There have been some decisions in Washington, Minnesota, and other areas where tribes have taken on entities. I don't know, I feel it's governments and corporations about pollution issues where they won. The Rappahannock tribe is the first tribe, federal designated tribe, to put it in their constitution for the rights of nature, and they are working on standing up the infrastructure so that if they felt the need, they could bring, I guess, use that system as they see fit against, entities or whoever else. And it's, I would emphasize that they are a sovereign government, and so it is something that they have the right to do on their own. And that's the important part. They are their own sovereign government, and so they're able to stand up these types of things that seem foreign to us. But it's it's definitely new and on the horizon. But it's going to be fascinating to see how it all works into the future.
Yeah, and they are sovereign government as recognized federally. They're not a sovereign government in the sense of a state entity. Um, and yeah, there's some legislation that didn't pass this past year that used terminology like government to government relationship, and that caused problem with the legislation passing, even though federally that is the status.
Right. And
So
it's
yeah,
the problems in that legislation, as far as I know, was that there was a sticking point of the term consultation versus consent, because there was language that had to do with burial grounds, and they wanted the right to consent on certain burial grounds on permits and that type of thing. At least that is my very general understanding of why that bill did not probably move forward, because it was made more complicated by language that was put in during the General Assembly process.
and as the issue, okay, I'm not gonna. All right, we're just about an hour. I'm just going to make one last statement on this, and then we're gonna wrap up for today. More on our agendas going forward. Um, uh, the tribe has recognized expertise in terms of and a role in culture and the environment, and those issues. So those kind of policy discussions, they really do have a government to government, potentially government to government. No, they do have a government to government role with their counties that their service area um, covers, and but what the difference between the tribe and their responsibilities and the counties are implementation of, for example, environmental law. So localities have specific responsibility for stormwater management, both managed program and funding it. Tribes do not. And so, we've got to there's equal footing in some areas, and there is not equal footing in some areas. And that is a reality that the commission is going to have to grapple with when they ask the question of should they have the same status as a county or the city, for example. And so that's very early preliminary research on my part, but fascinating discussions ahead. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Unless anybody's got something, final words on either one of our topics, since I broadened it, even though the tribe wasn't on today's agenda.
Just quickly, counties are not sovereign states. So it's a very unequal, and that is part of the problem with the tribe, is they do not want, yeah.
No, you are absolutely correct. Counties are simply political subdivisions of the
Yeah.
county, and that's all they are. And they don't have the same status as municipalities, which are towns and cities only under state code. Um, so that's why you have the county administrator form of government, which is the basic form of government for a county that really goes back to yeah, goes way back. Um, and frankly, no offense, John McCarthy, county administrator is nothing more than a chief of staff to the board of supervisors under the county.
Absolutely. They
That's
can be
it. That's
delegated a certain amount of authority, but they don't have any executive power whatsoever. So
That is absolutely correct. And sometimes that gets forgotten in the day-to-day world of local governing.
I certainly tried to.
I'm not going to make any comments there on my tenure. So, all right. Thank you all very much. Great discussion. Jillian and I are going to try to summarize this and get some stuff back out to at least this small group, since you were involved in the discussion to react to, try to make some sense out of it. Um, Thanks very much, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.